What's up, everyone? This is Adam Fromal and Dan Favale here with the Full Court Press. This is going to be our third episode, and today we're just going to talk about point guards. Last night we saw three of the best in action. We had Chris Paul just go absolutely crazy with 42 points and 15 assists. Derrick Rose hit a game winner, and Steph Curry just went nuts from behind the arc. So, Dan, right now, number one point guard in the league, go.
It has to be Chris Paul. People who know me think that I have some issues with him in terms of him always being in attack mode. I think he's the Miami Heat version of point guards where he has a whole nother level and he doesn't always use it. But I don't really think there's a question. Who else are you going to pick at this point? I'm assuming you have Chris Paul as well.
I do have Chris Paul, and it's just not even close for me. I see where you're coming from with the tendency to over dribble, to overpass, and not always be in that attack mode. But at the same time, it's never really mattered. He still puts up his numbers, and in the fourth quarter, if the game's close, he goes in to take over. I mean, the numbers he puts up at the end of a close game are just ridiculously mind-blowing. He can score, he can pass, he can get to any spot on the court. Plus, with Doc Rivers there now, I'm not really worried about that attacking mentality. For the first time, he has a coach that can really motivate him for 48 minutes.
I think Doc Rivers will help him along the lines with that. I didn't, in the first game against the Lakers, I thought that he was a bit passive for most of the game. So that, like I said, that's just one of my cons with him. But it's not even close, especially right now with the way injuries have shaped the point guard position. Like, you can't argue for Rondo or Russell Westbrook. You better not be arguing for Derrick Rose at this point, the way he's been playing. And like you said, Chris Paul's fourth quarters are generally amazing. So he's clearly the best point guard in the league. Like I said, it's not even close, but it's one of those positions where I have an issue with the best player at his position, and I feel like there's other positions like that as well. Like, I'm sure people have tons of issues with Dwight Howard as the best center, but it's not even close. It's Chris Paul by far.
See, I've had Paul up at the top of my personal rankings for a while now. Over the last couple of years, I don't think anyone's really been able to touch him.
Probably over the last 5, right, I would say, would be good.
I think you could make a case for that ever since maybe 07, 08.
Yeah, somewhere around there. Maybe 09 at the latest.
Yeah, but I think that while he definitely has that crown, this is the season where it might not be taken away from him, but somebody else might put their hand on it and try and grab it from him. I mean, we have so many good young guards. We've got Curry, we've got Rose. I know you just said that you don't want to put him in that conversation right now while he's coming off the injury, but I think he still belongs there. He's a former MVP. And then we've also got, we got Kyrie, right? It's Damian Lillard could eventually work his way into there. Not yet, but in a little while. So I think we're seeing that golden age of point guards just creep up even more. And I still think he has that crown at the end of the year, but it'll be close. I think Curry in particular is the one that's going to challenge it.
I was actually going to say that Curry is the second best point guard in the NBA right now. But kind of going back to your golden age of point guards thing, I was thinking about this the other night. I was talking over with one of my friends, and I'm not sure if he really understood because I tend to babble, as you know. But I feel like the golden age of point guards has been fueled by the demise of the center position. They're able to get to the rim easier, and that I feel that's also why score-first point guards are becoming so common. I mean, you can make a case that there are times for games at a time where Chris Paul seems to vacillate between score-first and a pass-first mentality. But guys like Stephen Curry, who are seemingly balanced in terms of how they look to do whatever, they look to score first. Curry tends to shoot, so that's probably a bad example, but you look at Westbrook, you look at Rose, you look at Lillard, you look at Irving, and they're just all over the place. And even the mid-tier guys, like you look at Lawson, you look at, God help you, Raymond Felton, you look at Deron Williams, who's always still been a pass-first. Maybe Deron Williams is a bad example, but do you kind of see where I'm coming from there?
Oh, absolutely. But you know what really annoys the hell out of me? It's when people start talking about point guards and being like, yeah, he's a true point guard. He's a pure point guard. Who gives a fuck? Like, as long as you put up numbers, I don't really care what kind of numbers they are. Like, there is not a certain type of production that you need from each position so long as you're able to get production and build around it. Like, yes, Westbrook scores a lot of points. Has that really held the Thunder back?
Absolutely not. And if you ask Kevin Durant, he'll tell everyone to go screw themselves. And he probably has already. I think he told that to Skip Bayless once, indirectly, obviously. It varies by team position, really. Like, some teams need that score-first point guard. It suits them. Chris Paul, with the type of team he's surrounded by, he pretty much has no one besides Jamal Crawford who's going to create their own offense. He needs to be a pass-first point guard. You look at Westbrook, who the number one scoring option, all he really does is create his own offense. As a number two guy, he should be looking to score because they need that more than they need the facilitator. So it varies by position most definitely, but there's no definition of a true point guard. Like, positions are open to interpretation. They're subjective now, more than ever. Centers don't have to be good defenders anymore. You look at Brook Lopez. So it's just, I can't stand when people say that either. So you're right. It's, if they're going to put up the numbers and if they're going to do what their team needs them to do, if Russell Westbrook needed to pass more, if he was dishing out 2 assists a game, but he's dishing out consistently between 5 and 7 a night when he's over his career. And the same goes for other point guards like that. Like Stephen Curry, I like that he's a balanced facilitator, and I like that he can be an undersized 2 guard. So there's no such thing as a true point guard. It makes no sense. You could be a true pass-first point guard. You could be a true score-first point guard. There's no such thing as a true point guard.
I think in general, I was just getting kind of annoyed last night, and especially this morning, like looking back at the discussion on Twitter and in comment sections about all the performances last night. There's A, the true point guard thing, but B, the Derrick Rose performance. Like, yes, he hit a game winner to beat the Knicks. I know you absolutely loved that moment, but at the same time, like, he wasn't very good, and we can't let that one game-winning shot. Yes, it's the most important shot. Yes, it got them the win, but it can't overshadow everything else. I actually heard people saying that Rose was better than Chris Paul in general because he hit a game winner, and all CP3 did was put up 42 points. Yeah, you know why Chris Paul didn't hit a game winner? Because he didn't need to.
Yeah, I mean, I'll never understand that argument. If you're looking at in a vacuum where none of those players shot or they both had terrible games and Chris Paul scored more points but Rose hit the game winner, you want to argue that? That's fine, but Chris Paul made history last night. His team won rather easily. They found themselves down at one point, but they fought back. And at the end of the night, you know what? Rose was still 7 of 23 from the field. And Rose only dished out 3 assists, but he committed 4 turnovers. And the Bulls, if I believe, they were -1 with Rose on the floor last night. So you want to tell me that Derrick Rose had a better game because he hit a game winner, which, I'm going to sound like a homer, was a lucky game winner? He couldn't see the rim over Tyson Chandler. And the only reason he got a shot off, probably, instead of passing it or having to literally fall out of bounds and throw it up from behind the basket, is because Raymond Felton let him get by. So I don't want to hear that Rose had a better game or that Rose should be in the best point guard conversation right now. You want him when he's healthy? Come talk to me. Rose isn't even close. You know what? Rose right now isn't even a top 5 point guard in the NBA. Not the way he's playing now. And
it's
maybe
funny how much that narrative has shifted. I mean, based on just the preseason, we were talking about how he was back in that MVP conversation, how he could carry the Bulls to a number 1 seed, and I think the early portion of the year has been a bit of a reality check. Like, now that he's not facing off against that preseason competition and teams are actively trying to slow him down because it matters, it's proving that there is some time needed to get back into the swing of things. So do you think he'll get back into that conversation by the end of the year? How long do you think it'll take?
It really depends on the reason why he's struggling. Is it because he's working off rust? Maybe he's exhausted because he expended himself in the preseason? Because he played well in the preseason and his motor was there. And motor has nothing to do with the level of opponent that you're playing. Or is it really he's, like I said, not healthy? So, and I think what people do need to consider is that if he truly is going to shoot more jump shots, they can probably expect more nights like these, because Rose, the last time he played, he was only shooting 43.5% from the field during the lockout season. So, and that was with him not taking that many jump shots. I mean, he took 4 threes a game, but he's already averaging like 6 through 2 in the regular season. So if he's going to shoot more jumpers because he has a quote-unquote improved jumper, he's going to miss more because those are lower percentage shots than shots at the rim. So he could be worse than we remember. And it might have nothing to do with the injury, but because he's tried to change his game. And you know what? He can say it's him trying to be a more well-rounded point guard, but let's look at that last play last night. The Derrick Rose that we knew a year or two ago would have attacked the rim. And I get that he drove. He faded towards the strong side, which he just wouldn't have done. So he didn't attack the rim with reckless abandon. You know what? That's fine if he doesn't want to get injured again. But I think we need to.
Did he have a shot really similar to that to open his last healthy season, though?
What do you mean?
That lockout shortened season wasn't the Christmas game winner that floater while he was running through the middle of the lane?
Okay, but he wasn't in the middle of the lane this time, is what I'm saying. Is he didn't streak down the middle. He went almost away. When he's shooting, I guess he was going towards the basket. It just didn't look like a normal Rose attack on that last play. I would have thought he would have cut through the middle, because that's what Derrick Rose does. So, again, let's put that aside. If he's going to shoot more jumpers, I think we need to be prepared that a more well-rounded Derrick Rose isn't going to make for a better Derrick Rose, and maybe he'll need to go back to his old ways a little bit more and shoot jumpers less and attack more. But again, that's the mindset after injury. That's his health after injury. So I don't think he's going to get in that conversation by the end of the year, like a legitimate conversation. I'm not going to look at him and be like, he's a top 3 point guard by the end of the year. I don't see it. And I know he'll be high in superstar power rankings, as he should, unless he continues to play like this. But if we're talking about in terms of just point guards, by the end of the season, I'm confident I can name at least 3 to 5 that will be better than him without there being a question.
I'm going to disagree with you. I do think that he can get back up to that number 2 spot. I don't see him passing Paul, especially in the system that's been built around him. But I'm going to sort of shift gears here for a second, because we've mentioned probably 10 to 15 point guards so far, and there are 2 elite guys whose names haven't even come up, and that's John Wall and Tony Parker. Personally, I think Tony Parker's the second best point guard in the league right now. He's not glamorous, but he always puts up steady production and he wins games. So where you got those 2?
If I'm going down, if I'm going to start at 1, I have Chris Paul. Number 2, right now, and again, we're basing a lot of this off small sample size, but also the end of last season, I've got Steph Curry. And this is a lot of it's because of injuries. And then 3, I would have Tony Parker. Tony Parker is one of the most underrated players in the league, not just at his position. And we look at the flashy things a lot, like game winners like Chris Paul can hit, or those clutch shots, or taking over in the fourth quarter. We look at those 3-point brigades that Stephen Curry puts up. We look at Derrick Rose's game winners and his explosiveness. Tony Parker is probably the second most well-rounded point guard in the NBA behind Chris Paul. Even though I don't have him, but who is more well-rounded than him? I get he's not a great shooter, but he can shoot. He's got a great floater. He can attack. He's not a horrible defender. So
you know what I'd love to see is a Derrick Rose for Tony Parker trade. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But let's say it does. What does Tony Parker do as that definitive number 1 option, where he doesn't have to play in that brilliant Spurs system that kind of minimizes individual impact? If he's allowed to go out and be like, dude, you need to be the MVP if we're going to get the number 1 seed, could he fill that role?
I think he could, but I think it would be a different role still, even though it's the same role. I don't think Derrick Rose is great at setting up his teammates. He has phenomenal court vision, but if you look at, and I don't want people to interpret this as me saying that Derrick Rose sucks as a facilitator. A majority of Derrick Rose's assists come off double teams that he's generating by getting into the paint, which is setting up his teammates in a sense. But if you look at Parker, you look at Chris Paul, what they can do off screens, what they can do one-on-one and still thread the needle. I don't think Rose can thread the needle like they can. Tony Parker is someone who can make his teammates better, all things being equal. Like, he doesn't need those double teams. He doesn't need to get in the paint, and I love that he doesn't need the ball to be effective, which is, it's not a dying art, but it's a lost art among some point guards. Is Derrick Rose effective without the ball in his hands? No.
No, not particularly. So on the other one that I brought up, John Wall, I definitely think he ranks behind all the guys that you mentioned, but I'm not sure he will by the end of the year. I can see him developing into a top 5, maybe top 3 guy by the end of this season.
Top 3. Top 3.
He's so good at making his teammates better. Incredibly dynamic getting to the rim, and if he has even some semblance of a jumper. And you want to interrupt me, so go ahead.
You're just by saying, if you're really going to say top 3, I want you to understand the gravity of what you're saying. You right now have Chris Paul, then Tony Parker. So you're saying he's going to be better than Derrick Rose, Russell Westbrook, Kyrie, Stephen Curry, all those guys. You're saying that he has the potential to become better than all those guys this season.
The potential to, yes. I mean, he's averaged, 18 points, nine assists a game while playing with just a shitty lineup. Like, all he's had to work with is a couple mediocre big men and half a season of Bradley Beal. They didn't even play together that much. Now he actually has a team built around him. I mean, we have Marcin Gortat and Nene in the front court. If Otto Porter and Martell Webster, who I know you hate, are healthy, then that's actually going to space out the court a little bit. And I know we both think that Beal is going to develop into a stud. If he takes control of that team, leads them into the playoffs, and averages something like 20 points a game, and he can still put up 10 assists, which would make him the first guy to do it since Paul, then yeah, I think you can make that argument. He's just that dynamic, and you have to look at the situation he's in. I mean, it's been a tough one throughout his career. He's still excelled, and he's only getting better. So is he guaranteed to finish in the top 3? Hell no. But there's definitely a chance.
I don't even think he's going to finish in the top 5 this season, and I've been pretty mean to John Wall, for want of a better word, because of his jump shot, and people always point out one statistic from one area and be like, he's okay. His jumper hasn't been good. He's not a good three-point shooter. Hopefully it gets better. I could see him developing into a current Deron Williams in terms of his production kind of teetering from year to year. Like, where we look at Deron Williams one year, like when he first came to the Nets, and we're like, he could really make a case for the best point guard in the NBA. And then there's another year, like last season, where it's like, well, he played half a season well, the other half he didn't. And there's also the similar injury situations. I think eventually John Wall can be a top 5 point guard in the NBA. I don't think he'll ever be a top 3, because I think you do need to be more well-rounded than he'll ever be. And he's never going to have, I don't think he's ever going to have that jump shot. And if I eat my words, then maybe. He has potential to be a top 5 point guard. Not this season, I don't think. You're right, though. The Wizards are improving around him, so it will be interesting to see what he can do with an improved team. But right now, there's just too much talent in his position for him to leapfrog all those other guys to make the top 3 or even the top 5. I mean, you're talking about then leapfrogging guys like Russell Westbrook, a healthy Rajon Rondo. I could just go on, but I don't see him making the top 5. Especially, he's not going to be better than Kyrie this season, assuming they're both healthy. So it's just top 5 seems like a stretch to me. Top 3 seems impossible.
I can see that. I'm more down on Kyrie than you are. I love watching him play, but I haven't seen that consistent defensive impact. And as you mentioned, health. I mean, are you really one of the best point guards in the league if you're only giving 50, 60 games a season? And no matter, even if you're marginally better than the other player, if you aren't on the court, it doesn't really matter.
Well, if we want to talk about what John Wall's done with the Wizards up until this point, Kyrie finally has a good team around him. Let's see what he can do this season, then. It's kind of a similar situation. I agree health's an issue, but I think his first season was blown a little bit out of proportion because he missed like 15 games because people are like, he only played 51. There was only 66. 15 games is kind of a lot, but let's slow down on that one. Last season is unnerving a little bit. Let's see if he can stay healthy this year. And they also kind of put the red tape on him last year. They knew they weren't playing for anything. They wound up with the first pick. So I feel like last year's injuries were blown out of proportion a little bit. He probably could have played in 65 games easily. But again, that's just me. I do see where you're coming from. I think him and John Wall are in similar situations where it's like, they have half-decent teams. This year, I think we'll learn who they are, who they can become. And this will be the year before the year one of them jumps into that top 5.
Speaking of Irving, I want to hand out a couple superlatives real fast. I think that Irving has the best handles in the league, and he makes the best commercials. I mean, those Uncle Drew ones are phenomenal. And I think that Steph Curry is the best shooter of all time.
Steph Curry is clearly the best shooter of all time. There was a play.
Is it a debate at this point?
No, I'm sure some people will come back with Ray Allen and Reggie Miller, but it's not even a debate. He's hit through his first years almost 200 threes more than the second guy. I don't even know.
Yeah, I think that's the number.
So it's ridiculous. And just this play last night is so Stephen Curry. Ray Allen has one of the quickest releases I've ever seen. But last night, late in the game, the Warriors are kind of late in the game. The Warriors are staging their mini comeback. They're on the break. Iggy passes him the ball, and Iggy and I believe it's Bogut are wide open under the basket, and Curry bombs away from like 27 feet out and drains it in transition. And he released it so quick. It's phenomenal. The poise, the control, his mechanics. He's the best shooter, and it's not of all time. It's not even close.
I heard some people panning him for that decision, and I kind of have the opposite view. I think it's a brilliant move. Not only do you have a chance at getting that one extra point, even though you could have converted an easy alley-oop, but there was no one under the basket. If he misses that shot, then Bogut's going to get the rebound and easily put it back. You're going to get a guaranteed 2 points, so why not get that extra one?
I'm going to take
to see more people do that.
I'm going to take it one step further, and I totally agree with what you said, but in the Warriors' case and in Steph's case, that's what they do. Transition threes is their thing, and if that's your system, you don't deviate from what's worked because something appears easier. What if Bogut botches a dunk? What if Iggy botches a dunk? Which they won't, but your success is predicated on long ball shooting. And that's what they do. And if that's your system, then keep going for it. If 3-point shooting works for you, you look for that 3-point shot before you look for the 2-point shot. And that's what the Warriors do, let's be honest. They're not running that ball inside to Bogut. They'll run some nice pick and rolls, but they normally have him coming out to run high pick and rolls in hopes that Steph or Clay are going to be open for a 3 afterwards. So that's their system, and you can't chide, especially when it's the best shooter of all time. And you know what? He's only played a few years, so let's even just say this for the people who are going to be like, he's not the best. If you're a top 5 shooter of all time, you have the right, if you're open, to shoot in whatever situation you want, regardless of who's open.
I would agree with that, and I actually like Chris Paul to start doing that. I mean, I saw a couple highlights this morning just played over and over of him throwing those alley-oops to Blake Griffin, right?
Yeah, because Lob City is dead, right?
Exactly. So, I mean, I would love to see Paul pull up from 3. I mean, Blake Griffin's gonna go down there and collect any miss. So why not have the chance at the extra point? I saw Mark Jackson continuously look disappointed and frustrated at all of those alley-oops, and I'm now going to believe that he was not frustrated at the fast break opportunities, but he was frustrated that Paul wasn't shooting. Because he wants that to happen. I'm going to believe that. You are not going to be able to convince me otherwise.
Paul is an underrated shooter, so it's funny that he doesn't. And he seems to live, if you've noticed, when he drives into the lane, he kind of lives off the most inefficient shots in basketball, and they go in. He shoots not long-range 2s, but mid-range jumpers, which aren't like they're not high percentage shots normally. And I think Doc Rivers wants to space the floor. I think he's always wanted to space the floor while he was in Boston, but he never had those weapons. They were a half-court oriented team without shooters really. And for them to really grasp that change, CP3 needs to become more unbridled in his shot selection from behind the arc. And I think that will help spark the change. Like, you don't want Jamal Crawford and Matt Barnes and JJ Redick just leading the way from downtown. You need to show that, we're going to space the floor. Paul needs to space the floor. So I'm not saying he does a bad job of spacing the floor, but he needs to look for his shot beyond the arc more. So I think you're absolutely right. I would love to see him pull up and transition more too. And if they're really trying to get away from Lob City, which just seems stupid. I understand they don't want it to define them, but the whole way they put it was just dumb. Start shooting and stop looking for the lobs, and especially with Paul, who over dribbles. Even though you love him, he over dribbles.
Kind of. He's the most fun person I've ever seen play in person. I was lucky enough to sit down pretty close to him and just noticed how everything he does on the court has a purpose. So yeah, he might over dribble on occasion, but all the head fakes, all the hesitation dribbles, they each serve their purpose and let his teammates get more into their cuts. So I'm going to hesitantly disagree with that, but we could probably spend all day talking about point guards. I mean, we already almost have, so let's turn it over to you now for what we're going to start using as our closing segment.
Yes, let me introduce what burns my bacon, where me, Adam, and I are each going to take turns just ranting and raving about something that really grinds our gears, so to speak, but it's burning our bacon, and we're going to make it sizzle. When we have guests on, we're going to put them on the spot, and they're going to have to tell us what burns their bacon. I'm going to start off, and I have a problem, of course, with New York Knicks head coach Mike Woodson and his lineup selections down the stretch. last year, he had a tendency when Amari Stoudemire was healthy and having a good game to bench him late in games when the Knicks probably needed his threat down low. Whatever, I'm past it. I am done seeing Raymond Felton late in games. I understand what he brings in terms of motor and that they don't really have an elite point guard, but you need defense down the stretch. And last night was the perfect example of that, and he did a horrible job of facilitating for Melo. I know we're going to bash Melo for his shot selections down the stretch in hero ball. But, if you're going to play hero ball, let's give Melo the ball with more than 5 seconds left on the shot clock. And when it's the last possession of the game, let's have someone on Rose who can actually move laterally well, who can get over screens if they come. Rose got by Felton last night, and it happened on numerous occasions. Felton cannot defend the pick and roll. I'd rather have 36-year-old Pablo Prigioni out there. And late in games, game on the line, Melo should have the ball in his hands, and Raymond Felton takes it out of his hands. Because, he's a point guard, and he's wasting time on the shot clock. Mike Woodson needs to get that through his head. I'm done with these late-game lineups. It's happened since last season, and he needs to figure it out, or otherwise games like last night could become more common.
So that's what burns Dan's bacon today. We want to know what makes you sizzle. We want to know your top 5 point guards in the NBA. Again, this is Adam Fromal and Dan Favale with the Full Court Press.